What's up, Ground School? This is Characters back with my next Ground School short today. I'm going to be covering, as promised, the second topic on this thread by Sarsant. And this is where he sort of queries at the end of the post. I think this is another sort of interesting spot that people tend to go wrong on quite a lot. And it's where we have sort of a marginal, would commonly be known as a bluff catcher against a villain who is probably known to us to be quite aggressive, to be firing a lot of bets, to be making us uncomfortable, putting pressure on us. So the question here is, like, what is our crumbling point? At what point do we just have to fold to aggression, or are we planning on calling down 3 streets, or are we planning on just calling 1 or calling 2? So the first thing I'm going to say about these kind of spots is that they are extremely opponent dependent. These are like the most villain dependent spots you'll ever come across in poker. Obviously against unknowns, you're going to need to have a sort of depending on the stake that you play, a sort of threshold for how many streets that you should call with your second pair type hands. Against aggressive opponents, obviously we want to have more of a plan than just something that's default, because if we're just planning on calling 1 or 2 streets, perhaps we're being exploited by someone aggressive who's just always firing 3 and just always making us fold and just printing money against us. So against someone who we know to have these tendencies, we need to adjust and deviate from our standard plan and sort of base how many streets we're going to call on the aggression that we've seen him make in the past. So first of all, I want to talk about pre-flop hand selection and how to avoid a lot of these spots, a lot of the worst of these spots. Now these spots come in 2 different sort of varieties, and your hand selection will determine how often you get into each variety of these sort of bluff catching call down spots, right? So we're in the blinds, and we want to think about what sort of hands we're going to defend against this aggressive button opener. He opens very wide from the button, but he does make life difficult. He's got good frequencies, and he's not like completely maniacal. It's not the case that he just fires 3 regardless on every board. That would be very easy. We could just call down with any pair all the time, but that's not going to be the case. He's going to be a bit selective, but putting a lot of pressure on us. So now let's think about what sort of hands we can defend from the blinds and how well these are going to flop first of all, and that way we can actually avoid some of the worst of these spots. So if we flat a hand like 6-7 suited, the implied odds are kind of there in a sense. Like, we can flop a big hand and make a lot of money when he keeps betting into us. However, he's never going to have a really strong hand to stack off with when he has a wide range, so we don't want to flat those for implied odds so much against him. We'd rather do that against in multi-way pots with very tight players that stack off a top pair or top kicker all the time and things like that. And what kind of hands do these flop as pairs? They flop bottom and middle pair, sort of the hands that our original poster here is referring to in this thread. They flop also a kind of showdown value that I would describe as vulnerable showdown value. I've been over this in my How to Master 6 Max series. You can have a look at that. I can't remember which one it was, but yeah, anyway, I can leave that after the video if you want any more reference. I'll just get on with this. So basically, vulnerable showdown value would be having 6-7 on Jack 7-3, right? 2-tone. So there's so many bad turns here that are going to come off. Yes, we can call the flop. Yes, we're clearly ahead of villain's c-betting range because he's c-betting just with air. But on like 2/3 of the turn and river combinations or something, our hand is going to go from being a second pair bluff catcher to a really vulnerable hand, and villain's always going to have a lot of equity against that. If he has 2 overs and a gut shot, he has plenty of equity against us here with this kind of vulnerable showdown value. So against someone that's aggressive, we probably don't want to be flatting a hand like this, like 6 of diamonds, 7 of diamonds, because if we say that flop comes down, let's say it's like Jack 6. Let's say it's like Jack 9-6, right? So this is like very sort of marginal showdown value. Bottom pair, bluff catcher, lightly good most of the time on the flop, but is it going to stay that way, and how are we going to be able to handle the aggression? Probably pretty badly. Like, if we take a hand such as, let's see, he just has king of diamonds, sorry, king of hearts, jack of diamonds, so he has like a gut shot. No, sorry. So we've got jack 9-6, so say he has king of hearts, queen of diamonds, so gut shot and 2 overcards. I just need to change that. And he already has 40% equity. You get rid of that gut shot, he's still going to have like 30-something% equity. There's just so many things that can go wrong. Often by the time we get to the river we don't have the best hand, so if we're calling down with bottom pair there, we're just beat far too frequently, and we are being owned, as the original poster states here. But if we have a hand that actually flops much better, like texture wise, like let's clear all this actually, okay, and clear all, and let's say that we then defend a hand like, this is the second type of hand, a hand like king jack, a hand that flops good pairs. It doesn't flop bottom pairs, it doesn't flop middle pairs too often. It usually flops top pair when it flops a pair, and it has a good kicker, and it's just like very dominating of villain's range, very rarely dominated by a wide button opening range, and just plays so much easier because it has what's known as invulnerable showdown value, and that's where it flops the kind of hands that just allow you to get to showdown. So we have king jack, and the flop is like sort of ace jack 4 or something like that. So here again we have second pair. Again, it's not ideal, but here the board isn't going to deteriorate horribly. Villain's range isn't going to get stronger and stronger on every card. You know, there's so many cards less than a jack, just blank cards that are going to roll off. They're not going to do anything for villain's range. They're not going to scare us anymore. They're not going to turn a relative hand strength into something that's worse than it was on the flop. So if we have a read here against how often villain fires, like say he usually fires 2 on ace high boards, we just call 2. If we've seen him fire 3 before, we can just call down. But my point is here that we can avoid so many of the really bad spots here just with hand selection. You know, don't flat pocket sixes against a villain who's opening super wide and firing loads post flop. The hand is going to flop bottom pair, and it's going to have no equity to improve, and it's going to be shit. Don't flat 8-7 suited against this guy. Again, it's going to flop shitty pairs. Your implied odds don't compensate for this, and you're going to get owned because he's going to be barreling you effectively, and the board is going to get worse and worse. Instead, flat hands that dominate his range. King jack dominates his range, so many worse kings and jacks he's opening from the button. Furthermore, when we flop one of our second pair dreaded bluff catchers, it's not the case that we need to worry about the board getting worse and worse, and we need to worry about having terrible equity even when we flop a pair. Our equity is actually really good here against like any 2 cards. Like, so this is very inaccurate, and it's basically just to demonstrate that if villain is opening super wide from the button, then c-betting this board 100%, we're going to have much more equity than we will against like all the overcards you can have on that last flop when we had like the pair of 7s. So that's just very biased. I've sort of manipulated my data there for it to be a bit biased by doing any 2 cards and then putting in an exact hand in the last one, so don't take that as face value. It's just to show you that in general these hands do much better. They can get to showdown more easily, and what we mean by that is that they can stand more streets of action because the worst hands against them don't have lots of equity, and it's not the case that more and more better hands are being created with each card that rolls off. Sometimes that will be the case, you'll get like a queen turn, a king turn, but most of the deck is friendly, it's safe, it's good for a hand like king jack here. So hand selection against an aggressive opponent, particularly if you're not too sure how to play against them post flop, is very essential pre-flop. And no one is going to be good at playing a spot where they have third pair against someone who's going bet and has an insanely and is very aggressive and hard to play against, and they don't have like great reads. No one is going to be good in that sort of spot. You can put like Phil Ivey in that kind of spot, and he'd probably like, he wouldn't put himself in a situation where he'd be like call guess river. He'd either be like bluff raising flop, or he'd be folding knowing that his hand is going to get worse and worse unless he had great reads or whatever. So that's the other thing you can do. You can turn hands into bluffs. So let's go back to that 6-7 hand very quickly. So we have an aggressive opponent, and we think our hand is going to get worse and worse against them. Let's say we have 7 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, and we know our opponent is sort of he's going to be firing lots of streets and making our life really difficult and stuff like that. So the flop comes down, Jack 7-5, and our opponent c-bets. This is just as an example. He'll be c-betting lots of hands here, but say this time he has that. Oh, I've done it again. I'm just awesome at this. So he can't have the Jack of Diamonds, which is good because I want us to have a backdoor flush draw anyway, because it helps with our equity. Okay, now I've given us a flush draw, which we don't necessarily want. It's going well, it's going well. So here, right, we know that we cannot call this flop because there's just so many bad turn cards, so many bad rivers. We don't know enough about how many streets he's likely to fire, but we know he's going to make life difficult, so we don't want to be calling the flop here. So perhaps we just want to raise as a bluff, as a semi-bluff. We have some equity. Look at that. Against top pair, we actually have 27%, which is decent. That's going to help astronomically. We're going to need folds so much less often when we have that equity. So we can't call down, but we have some equity. Maybe we fold our pure air to his c-bets, but with the stronger parts of our bluff range, the stronger parts of our folding range, perhaps we want to turn it into a bluff if he's c-betting so wide here. And that's another option, and that's my final point on this, is that if we can't call down because we have the vulnerable type of showdown value that we're going to get owned with, perhaps we want to bluff raise at some point as well. But don't go too crazy with this. It's just a thought against someone that's very aggressive, c-bets a lot, and is going to make life difficult. If someone's very passive and just fires one and gives up, maybe we can just peel one. So yeah, have a think about that stuff and leave me any comments or any suggestions for future Grinder School shorts or indeed full length videos as well. This has been Characters for Grinder School, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.